our podcast, where we will read and analyze Ozymandias by Percy Shelley. I'm your host, Rowan Wheaton.
And I'm Orchid Winters. I have only a couple vivid memories from my years before second grade or so. One of these few was my dad reciting Ozymandias by Percy Shelley to me as we walked to school together. I'm sure that my sister was there, but I don't remember her presence. All I remember is my dad and I walking along a tree-lined Mar Vista street, him filling the air with the sound of Shelley's poem, which he had memorized years before. I remember being enraptured by my father's, and by extension, Shelley's words. I had always loved poetry, something that I was only connected to by my father and the poems that he had memorized. These poems, mostly Robert Frost, were my literary childhood. Ozymandias, however, was different. Something about the poem plucked the taut strings between my father and we immediately launched into a spirited discussion of the poem, its themes, its pentameter, its wording. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, that tone and level sands stretch far away."
When I was at summer camp, some writer's workshop, we got extra points for reciting a memorized poem in the mornings for our houses. My friend, who I met a few days prior, wanted to read Ozymandias, to recite it while I held her up. I almost dropped her when I heard the poem. It struck a chord with me, the poem, and I've been thinking about it ever since, and getting a chance to more deeply analyze it now is a really full circle experience. The structure of the poem is this swelling of tone. The story starts almost timidly, mounting upon itself until it reaches its peak with the declaration of the King Ozymandias, and plateaus by the end. This is done by the use of adjectives. The adjectives become more and more aggressive and definitive, describing character over the physical characteristics of the statue. Let's look at the adjectives. At the start of the poem, the narrator keeps to neutral and strictly physical adjectives, speaking only of stone on sand and more of the location of the statue described. Where we see a real jump, or upping in the intensity, so to say, of the adjectives, is the description of the expression of the statue. We begin by hearing it described as the frown, and then the author doubles back, detailing first a wrinkled lip and jumping to a sneer of cold command. This doubling back to describe the frown with more severity showcases how the language changes over time. The tone mounts until we get to perhaps the top of the poem with the line, "I am Ozymandias, King of Kings." There we see a bit of retraction, then we see a bit of retraction in the intensity of the adjectives, coming down with the words like boundless and bare and lone and level as a summing up of the theme. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell it that its sculpture well those passions read which yet survived. Stamp on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round the decay of the colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away."
Percy Shelley, the writer of Ozymandias, was one of the poets who defined the 19th century of poetry. He was married to Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. He wrote Ozymandias for a sonnet competition with his friend, who was also a poet, named Horace Smith. This sonnet competition they decided that they would use the theme of the ancient Egyptian statues that had recently been found and displayed in the museum nearby. This podcast was by Orchid Winters and Rowan Wheaton. We use Soundtrap to record and edit this podcast. We use 3 sources for the information in this podcast: wikipedia.com, prepscholar.com, and poemanalysis.com. We found and read our poem from the Poetry Foundation. The music in this podcast was composed and performed by Frederick Sommerfeld.